Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
You know, even if you're a god of thunder, you gotta love yourself before you can love the thunder. You know what? Just go with me on this for a second. Thor has had a lot of adventures in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. As the only Avenger to get a fourth solo movie, well, as solo as happens in the MCU these days, Thor is destined to face the man he was, as well as the man he is destined to become. This isn't like some A24 type thing though, like he really could face those parts of himself, because comics and time travel, according to a theory by Redditor TheMediocreCritic. So, let's get into it. One of the things we know about the upcoming Thor Love and Thunder is that it will feature a new Thor from the MCU when Jane Foster proves herself worthy and wields Mjolnir. Somehow. Because Thor's big sis went and broke Mjolnir, and Cap returned the Mjolnir from the past they borrowed. But broken things can be fixed, like Thor's broken heart over his breakup with Jane Foster. Aw, it's okay, big guy. Even out of shape, you're a beautiful giant man with great hair. That's something Thor can understand, because he's one of the broken things that has been fixed. The Thor we met in the first movie was brash and impulsive. So brash and impulsive that he had to be grounded by his dad and sent to Midgard to sort himself out. Thing is though, at this point, he was already a brisk 1,500 years old. Being nearly immortal means that some things can take longer than us mere mortals, who have to sort our stuff out in a few dozen years because that's all we get. He can do the Grogu thing and just be a baby for like 50 years, and that's not even a big deal. Which is to say that Thor's brash teen years lasted a millennium and a half. So, see, someone else had an even longer adolescence. Dad. In the pages of the comics, this would be the period that Thor was hanging out with the Vikings, and in the 9th century encountered a few dead gods, and one Gorr the God Butcher, making them all dead. Right around that time, a genius industrialist started to come to terms with having an arc reactor in his chest and being Iron Man. Thor got grounded by his dad for almost restarting a war with the Frost Giants. This resulted in Thor falling in love with a Midgardian, coming to terms with the complicated relationship with his brother, the God of Mischief, and with the even more complicated relationship with his father and his father's legacy, as well as his own destiny. It was a complicated journey. He fought a giant green dude twice, saved the world a few times, then half the universe after missing a chance to save half the universe. He got a second chance to have a heart-to-heart with his mom, dealt with the loss of his homeland and his father. All of that led to the Thor we saw hitching a ride on the Benatar and abdicating his throne to Valkyrie. It's a new Thor, no longer bound by his destiny, and perhaps a little more in tune with who he is, or at the very least, who he wants to be. Just the kind of self-growth you want if you're looking to reconnect with that ex you're hung up on. But Thor is nearly immortal. He's got centuries ahead of him. And over the course of centuries, Thor could find his way back to the throne of the Asgardians. The pages of the comics have explored King Thor, though of course in a very complicated comic book kind of way. Instead of being the Thor of the multiverse timeline of 616, he was in a different timeline but still insisted that he was Thor from 616. Multiverses can be complicated. Buckle up, everybody. In this future, not quite future, but maybe the future, Thor was living every child's nightmare. They had become their father, one-eyed, stern, calculating, a complicated past, thanks in part to Loki finally wiping out all life in Midgard. Oh Loki, why can't we quit you? You're just so bad for us, and yet we love you. So what does this riddle of the Sphinx Asgardian edition have to do with things? Well, it has everything to do with the big bad with no nose set to menace Thor in Thor Love and Thunder. No, you sit down, Voldemort. We're going with a different noseless villain this time around. The sniffing challenged baddie, Gorr the God Butcher. Naturally, someone who has branded himself the God Butcher is eventually going to end up beefing with Thor the God of Thunder. But you can't just go around calling yourself a God Butcher and then be able to take out gods. You need some god butchering power and a really solid beef with gods. The last part comes from living on a planet perpetually on the verge of starvation, and the gods of the planet sending everyone's prayers to voicemail. Gorr's lack of faith after losing his family found him exiled and wandering the desert, where he found a kindred spirit fighting a gold-armored purple-skinned god. More than one eye, no single horn, the flying purple people eater remains at large. The god with the color scheme of the University of California college system was fighting none other than Knull, the original god hater. If you don't know Knull, you might know one of his creations, the symbiote known as Venom. The connections don't end there. Knull is the one who took off the head of the Celestial that created Nowhere. And there's another thing he's known for creating, All Black the Necrosword. Aside from sounding like a star rugby player from New Zealand, who's a fan of football, It also looks like the weapon that Hela used to take Asgard. Knull gave Gorr the Necrosword, and Gorr got his first taste of god butchering, and he liked it. Oh, he liked it. Eventually, that leads to Gorr killing a few Earth gods before Thor gets involved. But this wouldn't be the last time that Thor and Gorr… haha, Thor and Gorr. This fall on the CW. He's a god. He's a god butcher. Anyway, sorry. This wouldn't be the last time the two crossed paths. So as to not create any more god butchers, Thor went prayer answering to a godless planet thanks to Gorr, but Gorr had other plans. These plans involved the Pool of Forevers. The Pool of Forevers is like the Water of Sights in Age of Ultron, but instead of just looking, you get to go travel in time. Now Gorr can go back and kill the earliest gods, and eventually take over the time stream that has King Thor in it, killing and enslaving all the other gods to build a god bomb that would kill all the gods across reality. This guy really hates gods. When Avenger Thor met Gorr, instead he went back in time to the first time they met and kidnapped that Thor. When that Thor tried to destroy the god bomb, he instead thrust himself into the future that brought Viking Thor, Avenger Thor, and King Thor together. After a little scuffling, hammer time, and more than a little family drama with recreations of his family from the Necrosword, it eventually comes up Thor with Gorr defeated. All thanks to the hard work of the Three Thors. And we haven't even gotten to Jane Foster Thor. Wait, how can we get to Jane Foster Thor from all of this? Well, based on the Mediocre Critic's theory, we have some ideas of how that might play out, and how it fits in so well with the journey that Thor has been on in his time in the MCU. We last left Thor in a pretty good place. He abdicated his throne to Valkyrie, and decided to finally take his Asgardian version of a gap year by space road tripping with his new pals, the Guardians of the Galaxy. He had come to terms with his hardcore warrior past, had a complicated relationship with his also complicated brother. He decided that his destiny should be something that he decides, and space is the place to find that destiny. It would be on this journey that he would come across a godless land, being dragged in by Gorr the God Butcher, who is after the Pool of Forevers. Well, it seems like Thor has solved his Gorr problem, it only gets worse. Just like in the comics, Gorr goes back and revisits his first Thor encounter, which allows him to enslave the future Thor. As has been established in the MCU, time travel doesn't work in the self-erasing Back to the Future way. Though, does Back to the Future work that way? The Biff that ruled the dark Back to the Future 2 timeline had to be given the sports almanac from the Biff that was just a regular old dude in the hoverboard future. So both those Biffs had to coexist in separate but parallel timelines. Otherwise, the erasing of the hoverboard timeline would erase the old man Biff, giving young Biff the almanac, which would also erase most of the Marty and Doc timeline. Man, time travel is complicated. Way more complicated than multiverses, it turns out. Anyway, since changing things in the past just creates a different timeline, Gorr uses the Pool of Forevers to go back and create a timeline where he doesn't need to beat up Avenger Thor, because he headed things off with Viking Thor and now lives in a world where he has enslaved or killed all the other gods and torments King Thor, who has become cold and calculating like his father. Exactly the kind of fate he was trying to prevent. From this dark timeline, Gorr is able to strike out at our timeline Thor, bringing together the Thors from the past and the future, forcing Thor to reconcile the person he was with the person he could become. Still with me? Yeah, a little complicated. But wait, what about Jane Foster? She's got some hammer time in here too. Well, the Pool of Forevers is also how Jane Foster can get around the problem of Mjolnir not being around anymore, in the same way jet-setting around the quantum realm solved it the last time the power of Thor wound up in another worthy person's hands. When you're sorting out yourself and your growth, sometimes it's helpful to go back to past relationships that you might not have been the absolute best and taking account. Though it's not entirely likely that Thor will encounter Jane Foster in the vastness of outer space. Or will he? Over another Avengers post-Endgame's adventures, plucky intern Darcy has found employment with SWORD, the space arm of S.H.I.E.L.D. Jane in the MCU is one of the foremost authorities on the physics of interdimensional travel, and one who has not been arrested running around naked at Stonehenge. Might have been easier on the eyes than Selvig though, ugh. So in SWORD's capacity of eliminating Thanos-level threats before they arrive on Earth and attacking reclusive kingdoms and tearing the gems out of androids' heads, Jane Foster could pick up the same call that Thor receives. In fact, it's likely that Foster will be the one who traces Gorr's initial intentions, while Thor is distracted by the nail problem that Thor is hoping will be solved with his hammer. Or axe. Or whatever you call Stormbreaker. It's when the Pool of Forevers opens up time, Foster encounters the Mjolnir with Odin's enchantment that grants her the powers of Thor. So really, 4 Thors. 4 Thors, no waiting, huh? Be honest, while all this makes sense given Gorr's story, we all wanted it to be Jane Foster, Beta Ray Bill, and Throg. All we really want is Throg, Frog of Thunder. Throg can be the smart-mouthed frog in Thor and Gorr this fall on Freeform. I'm gonna keep pitching this idea until it really happens. Wish me luck!